I'm too nostalgic, I'll admit it.
We graduated 4 months ago. What can you possibly be nostalgic for?
I'm nostalgic for conversations I had yesterday. I've begun reminiscing events before they even occur. I'm reminiscing this right now. I can't go to the bar because I've already looked back in it in my memory, and I didn't have a good time.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes. We are down a man for a comic book retrospective. Eric Vreen was unavailable this week, so Joe and I decided to go off the DC Marvel route, go out and pick up on what is generally considered, or potentially the greatest writer-artist in the history of comic books, Will Eisner. His legend still remains to this day, still very influential. The Eisner Awards obviously are named after him, and we decided we're going to talk about Will Eisner's career, and we're going to talk about A Contract with God, maybe a couple of the other tenements from that story. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to focus on the man, his legacy first, and then get into the story. How you doing, Joe?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing great. Obviously, you are an award-winning editor. You're a comic book writer. You have to admit, Will Eisner has had an effect even on your career.
Oh, yeah. I mean, A Contract with God was something I wanted to read early on in my transitioning into writing and editing comics. And, I'm really glad I did. He incorporates a lot of things that I think we take for granted now, which we'll get into when we're talking more specifically about his work. But, ever since I was, younger, and when I just started following some of that stuff, like Eisner nominated this and that, it's like, obviously it's all, based on Will Eisner and his contributions.
It's crazy. He kind of starts out as a cartoonist, and then he becomes essentially the most, one of the most influential visual storytellers. We always hear that nowadays, and I think that's a skill that we're seeing lacking, somewhat in the comic book industry, as a lot of the better artists have kind of transitioned maybe into other vocations. So we have really skilled artists, but maybe not visual storytellers, and that's really where Will Eisner takes it to another level.
No, he really does, and he does have a similar sort of backstory to a lot of other artists at the time. Jewish man who served in World War II. So it's interesting when you look at a lot of like the big names and the big contributions. They all kind of come from that, and when he worked on stuff like The Spirit, obviously very very impactful for people who cared about the medium, who were doing things in it. One of his assistants on that book was Jules Pfeiffer, who's someone else who went on to have a career breaking new ground in comics, and is still alive to this day and has put out work within the last few years or so.
Absolutely. You mentioned The Spirit. That's kind of the first big work that people associate with him as being kind of groundbreaking. But it also, by the end of it changed his view on the comic industry. He was not happy when that finished.
No, which again goes back to a lot of similarities between him and other prominent cartoonists then. But despite all that, he never really left comics, in the sense that he would keep coming back. And after a while doing some other things, was a chief architect in popularizing the idea of a graphic novel in the U.S.
Absolutely. He's like the godfather of graphic novels.
Yeah, there's a few others that people might be able to go and talk about. Rhymes with Lust is another one from, Arnold Drake and Matt Baker that's considered up there. But as much as I do love It Rhymes with Lust, A Contract with God is the kind of book that when you go through it and you look at it, it's so visually interesting and stunning, and it sticks with you in a way where you're like, okay, I get where something like this could really make people be like, there's a lot here in this graphic novel format.
It's always interesting when you look back on people's careers. A lot of people, if they saw him, when he was alive, he would have been an older gentleman.
Yeah. But
then you kind of go back and read up on it. It turns out, he was a bit of a renegade. Like he was kind of bucking the system. Was it? What was the when there was a legislation essentially, targeting comic books, like he was one of the targets because he wasn't just staying in for kid-friendly, kid-specific stories. He was kind of testing the bounds of what a comic book could be. And he continued to do that even after the Comic Code Authority.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's the kind of person who was around before underground comics, but certainly had an impact and was someone who people like that drew some inspiration from, your Robert Crumbs and all of them.
Yeah, so he's had a very interesting career, very interesting man. When you talk about the greatest writer-artist combos in the world, like the one person having both skills, Will Eisner comes to mind, Frank Miller, for me, like a John Byrne.
Sure.
I don't know, is he number one, or is he of his era?
I certainly can't say he's of his era in that, it's almost like David Bowie in a way, where it's like his different eras and he's redefining different things along the way. What he did in the spirit, he then, many years later, broke new grounds with all the stuff he did with Contract with God and all the other Dropsy Avenue stories he would do. He's basically helped redefine the medium multiple times, and then, also went on to teach, at SVA. So there are quite a few of his direct students out there doing work now, still to this day. And, I think that's a great way to sort of, solidify the legacy of someone like, Eisner. And, again, Jules Pfeiffer, his assistant, having assistants that ended up going out there and helping to redefine the medium too. That's huge.
Absolutely. We think about A Contract with God, which is specifically, the story that we're going to get into. I believe it's released in 1978.
Yes.
Happens to be the year I was born, so it's been around for quite a while.
Yeah.
And it's it's strange to think that a man who made his mark so early, in a distinct era, kind of the Great Depression kind of era, that would remain relevant and still do something so groundbreaking in 1978. What is it about this time in comic books that really makes A Contract with God stand out and shake things up?
Yeah, I mean, this is all around that era where mainstream comics are, cutting down to 17 pages, where, right around that DC implosion, this book is coming out in this era. But, you have the increase of these underground comics. You have the prominence of artists like Robert Crumb, who are coming up around now, a little before this, but you're getting that stuff out there. And then you have A Contract with God, which it's not vulgar for the sake of being vulgar. It's not the same kind of comic that you might get from, like, some of what Robert Crumb did, but Robert Crumb would also do some religious comics and things like that as well. But some of the, like, grimy or raw kind of underground comics that were starting to come up, it is drawn and looks more in that vein while not being like that. It's just really interesting for a lot of reasons.
It is interesting. Obviously, this is a tale of a Jewish man written by a Jewish man from a certain point of view. Mm-hmm. As a Christian and someone that's obviously read up on the Old Testament and whatnot, I can absolutely relate to Hersh in this story. I think we've seen a lot of people go through these sorts of struggles in their life, and it's just for being kind of specific within like a specific subgroup in a specific city about this community. It really speaks to Eisner's ability to connect with people, where he could write the story to where I think a majority of people can go in there and really relate to losing faith and thinking that they've done everything right and something still bad happened to them.
Oh yeah, no, it's great in that way, and that he was able to put so much of himself in this particular story, having lost his daughter to leukemia. And that was apparently something he didn't really talk about in terms of this until, towards the end. This wasn't brought up in like the original printings and stuff like that, but when they would later reprint it, I think in the early 2000s, he had been more open about the fact that this was based on his daughter, but that it still hurt him so much at the time, he couldn't even write the character of the daughter as being his biological daughter, because that just would have been too much for him. So he wrote her as an adopted daughter.
Yeah, so it's just wonderful stuff, and just some of the feelings I get with the book before we get into the specifics with the illustrations. They are beautiful, and it's not a traditional comic or even kind of what we would think about as a graphic novel. You know, it's each page is a panel. In essence, you know, there are some that where you have like a 3/4 page panel and then a smaller panel, but for the most part, each page is its own panel, and he integrates the text into the imagery itself perfectly. I love it. I absolutely love it when I see this in comic books. The first time I was really blown away when I was reading, who was it? Alan Moore's Saga of the Swamp Thing. And he was always on those really great splash pages. He would integrate the text interwoven within the imagery itself, and it just felt like it was supposed to be there, like it was part of the tapestry of the image. And Eisner does that through this entire novel, and there's 4 stories in here. We'll talk about A Contract with God, but I love that style. I wish I know that it's probably a lot easier to do with the traditional lettering. I love hand lettering, and I love it even better when it's integrated into the imagery.
I do too. I'm a big fan of books like this with the hand lettering, where it's all like it's specifically like art. It is art integrated with the rest of the art, and that stuff knocks me out every time. Yeah,
so I love that aspect of it, but just the craftsmanship when you're reading the book and you're looking at the imagery, and you could read the book without ever reading the words and just be immersed in the imagery because it's so detailed and so finely crafted. The expressions on the face are so relatable. They draw you into the character and you're feeling for him. But even like the rain as he's walking home in the very opening images. It sucks you right in. It looks like it looks like rain. You feel like you're in that with the character.
Yeah, it's haunting. It's gorgeous. I don't know if I've seen rain done as well since in comics. Like it's a total knockout.
Absolutely. It's obviously it's not colored. It's a handcrafted black and white story, and just the amount of heart and soul that you can see that something had affected him. Obviously, later on in life, we learned that this was inspired by a tragic event that happened in his own life, and you could see that in there. And you could see, there's probably, I imagine when he's crafting this story originally, there are probably teardrops on these pages as he's recounting this story and how it was affecting him, in that moment.
Oh yeah, I can't imagine anyone being able to without it really, pulling at them like that, because. I mean, getting that daughter, what he does with, the contract that he writes up, which we'll get to, just all of that is it's very potent.
Absolutely. So let's get into the story itself. It's about a man named Hersh. So we meet the character. He's a Hasidic Jew. He's actually he's in Russia. They are going through hard times, and specifically, he's felt to be a godly man. He's gone out his entire life and just devoted himself to helping other people, like selfless sacrifice within his community. He's very esteemed within this Hasidic Jewish community within Russia. And it doesn't look like his village is going to make it. And the village elders do not want to see their culture just wiped off the planet. And they have enough money. They pull up the resources. And there's one person that they're going to send to America and hopefully give them an opportunity, continue on their traditions, continue on their culture, and take it, to America and hopefully have an opportunity to thrive. And they pick Hersh because he's, he's a godly man and he's someone that the entire town looks up to. Very cool introduction to the character, and really, fleshes out who you're meeting when he's walking in the rain and how did he get here, because it's a different character.
Yeah. No, it's seeing the young Hersh, he gets to New York, he has his own contract with God that he writes on a little stone that he keeps in his pocket. It's a nice stone tablet. And you see Hersh taking care of the elderly and, working hard to do the right thing for people.
Absolutely. He's a pillar in the community, specifically this one building. It's, what's the name of the street?
It's a Dropsy Avenue. It's like 55
Dropsy Avenue. Yes. He's a tenant there. And, he's doing the right thing. He's helping everyone out. He's become well established in his community there, and he receives a gift, and he thinks this is part of his contract with God. Someone leaves a child, essentially at his doorstep. They weren't able to take care of her. He finds her. He decides that he's going to adopt her as his own daughter. He names her after his mother, and she becomes essentially his whole life.
Oh, yeah.
He dedicates himself to raising Rachel up the best that he can and giving her the father that she deserved. And it's a really endearing, tender moment. It really makes you feel for the character.
Oh, yeah. No, you see him with the daughter in a couple of different stages, taking care of her when she's a baby, and then like holding her while, he's reading her a book, dancing with her. Like Will Eisner is able to hit a lot of these emotional notes with, being very conscious of page real estate.
Absolutely. Those are some of the wonderful montages when you really get to see the seasons of his life as essentially he's going through and raising this girl named Rachel. And then we get the tragic news, which has kind of led us up to the beginning of the story when we get introduced to the character and why he's at the stage that he's at, because she essentially becomes ill and succumbs to the illness at a very young age. And essentially it breaks him because he feels like God has not honored the contract. Like he honored the contract for God, but God did not honor his end of the bargain. And this was an affront or a direct violation of it. And he can't accept it.
No. And this is where, again, the lettering is really important because it gets very loud and almost violent in the pages that follow.
And you can see the lightning on the outside of his window is almost like God is speaking back, kind of thing. And it's very powerful stuff.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, Hersh looks terrifying in a couple of these images, just shouting, that whole bit of, if God requires that men honor their agreements, then is not God also so obligated? And he's just really losing it at this point.
Absolutely. And, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not Jewish myself. I am Christian, but I can absolutely understand and relate to the character here. When you think you've done everything that you were supposed to do, you held up your end of the bargain. I've lived my life in a good manner. I've tried to help everyone out that I can. I'm not perfect, but I'm always striving to do things for other people.
Yeah.
Why would bad things happen to me? I say this my neighbor, he's always out with his kids. He takes care of his family. He does everything he can to make sure that he's giving them a good life. And then one of them gets taken away from him. How could that even happen? Like, in what world is that fair? And it's absolutely, you can relate to it and you feel for him. And you're like, I know exactly where this character was.
Yeah.
When he felt that way.
Yeah. No, it should be a very relatable story for people,
Yeah. And then so he decides his contract's null and voided. So he shaves his beard off. He decides, I'm not going to be a godly man anymore. He broke his contract. I'm going to live life on my own terms. The first thing he does is he kind of goes out and takes some of the bonds because he was entrusted with the monies of the community because everyone trusts him with their money. He takes some of those bonds. He basically uses them as collateral to buy 55 Dropsy Avenue.
Yeah.
And so he's no longer a tenant. He's the landlord. And essentially, he ends up becoming a slumlord. He ends up buying the next building and the next building, and he becomes a man of very wealthy means along the way. But there's something missing about him, Joe. He kind of starts shacking up with the shiksa, which, as I understand from my Jewish friends, is not a good thing. That's a temptress.
Yes, but yeah, and you see this through, he no longer dresses like he's practicing. He shaves. He puts on a business suit.
All in defiance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's how it stays through the next stretch of the story here, where he is doing, like you said, building up his sort of slumlord empire in the Bronx.
Yeah, he's no longer, he's living in man's world. He's doing things for his own personal gain, and it all goes well for him. After he threw this, let's not forget, he takes the contract when he's screaming at God. I think he spits on it and he throws it out the window.
Yeah,
just to let you know how he feels about it. Yeah. But there's something missing inside of it, and you can see it when people are seeing him. He's getting all these gains. He's you would imagine if nowadays he's a millionaire, something like that. I'm not sure about during the Depression era how wealthy he would have been. He's treating all of his tenants like crap. He's raised the rent on them. He's not giving them as much heat, as far as their water and stuff like that. He's kind of turned his way from helping people. Even the poor widow that's raising her family on a widow's pension. Everybody gets their rent raised and all these things. And he's reaping the rewards of being essentially a slumlord. He becomes rich, but there's just something that's not right with him. Even the woman that he's shacking up with can see it.
Yeah,
she's like, you need to start drinking. Fill it in. Fill in this black hole with booze or whatever. But really, he misses that relationship that he had when he felt like that he had that contract with God when he was living for something greater than himself. And now that he's only living for himself, there's like a hole in his heart. At least that's the way I took the story.
Oh no, for sure. And there is still something about him that, loves God in the way he had been practicing, because he can't bring himself to drink. No. There's the one scene where, Jesus, like you said, like, come on, drink, do something, get your mind off it. And as much as he's done, that's something he can't bring himself to do still.
And he can't sell the building because he used the community bonds as collateral to acquire it. And he knows truly that's not really his building because it wasn't his money to begin with. Yeah. And that's when we kind of get this last, the final scenes of the story, which are really tragic. I will say this, as great as the story is, Mr. Eisner is more cynical than I am. After reading this whole thing, he's a very cynical take on these things. Bad things do happen to good people. Unfortunately, and you can, when you finally have this part of this hole in your heart filled in, and you're getting yourself right with God, things might not turn out well for you. So he goes to the elders, says, "Hey, I acquired this building with my with your bonds. I want to give you the bonds along with interest for whatever I owe you. I want to sign over the building to you. All I need you to do is create a new contract with God." He tells them the story and says it was violated. You are men of, like essentially theologians, I imagine. How to craft this. That way it can't turn on me this time. And that I can honor my contract with God, and God will honor his contract with me. And then I can be right with myself, and I don't have to keep living my life like this. He wants to get right with God again.
Yeah. And unfortunately, for Hersh, they can't do that. It's like, this is a private matter between you and God. We can't, and Hersh is not having it. We get back to that, loud for both. You are learned in the Word of God, and if you know His Word, you know His will, like that whole bit. But it's just not how it works.
But they do agree to it because he says, "I will give you the lease or the title to this building." And the community will make money off of it. It'll have a nice steady income of all the tenants in 55 Dropsy Avenue. So they acquiesce and decide to lay out this contract with God for him. And when he receives it, like, you can tell he's a different person. He's like crying, like he feels like this big hole, this void has been filled, and this is what he wanted the whole time. You could give him all the money in the world, all the riches, and all that stuff. And that's not what was ever going to fulfill him as a person. And he finally starts to fill that hole again. He feels like he's receiving it again. He reads the contract, top to bottom multiple times. And he's getting his life back together. And then the cynical nature of Mr. Eisner comes back in again, and he has a heart attack and dies.
Yeah, and it's basically right after he's talking about, finally, getting married, and then, having a daughter and naming her Rachel. And so basically he's talking about how this contract means, Rachel will come back to him, and that's when he has that heart attack.
Very interesting stuff. There's also an epilogue in there where a young man, also of that community, I guess he's bullied, he kind of defends himself. He ends up finding that contract as well. And you imagine, hopefully it goes better for him than it did for Hersh.
Yeah, and going back to your cynical nature here, right before the epilogue, it's again, this is all gorgeous. There's a few, at least a couple panels of lightning striking outside in the rain and wind, and it's gorgeous. But after everything, Hersh has done in his life, what he ended up doing that, he resented himself for and finally turned back to God, it ultimately doesn't matter, because when he died, it's real estate tycoon dies is the headline, not a man of God.
He had not fully redeemed himself, at least not in the eyes of the community. That's still how they saw him, even though, he was trying to make himself right. Like I said, it's very cynical nature to the storyteller. And it's just such a relatable story. As a believer, you're always, there are times when you start questioning things. And you can see that that was likely what was happening with Mr. Eisner while he was writing the story, and you can completely understand why.
Oh, yeah. No, and that epilogue is great, having the kid sign his name under Frimme Hersh to take over the contracts from him and all that. And it's not raining outside, and you got the light shining on him from the street lamp. It's all it's excellent. Everything is done with intention. There's no piece of art through this entire story that doesn't need to be there.
Absolutely, it's all beautifully constructed. And I really enjoy stories from the Great Depression era, personally. Yeah. Like The Grapes of Wrath is one of the best books I've ever read in my life. It's absolutely amazing. Also, there's a wonderful film adaptation if you don't have the time to read the entire book. But you read some of the extra stories in here when you're kind of the era. And my grandmother, who was like the greatest, sweetest person I've ever met in my life. Outside, I guess, of my wife and my kids now, but she was one of the nicest people I've ever met. And she was raised in the Depression era. And I can tell you this, you're reading these stories, I get it. She was the sweetest person in the world, Joe, but she was also tough as fucking nails. Sure. And you can see why, because so many people had to go through some very, very rough times.
Oh, no, for sure. My grandpa grew up through a lot of that. And, we got to hear, quite a bit from that time and what my great grandparents were doing then.
And you can see why some dudes would be able to storm a beach and then eventually go all the way to Berlin.
Yeah.
And, it freed an entire continent, just because of their own sheer will force that, obviously the island campaign from that generation, absolutely amazing contributions. There's some other cool stuff in this book. The Other Tenements. The one that really stands out to me is the second story, The Street Singer. And it's another. It's the message I get out of the book is, life is what you make of it. Oh, yeah. And everybody sees it differently. Because we got this street singer, and I guess his voice is so beautiful that this woman who had to give up, I guess, her career as like an opera singer. Yeah. She sees this man as her opportunity. Because his voice is like angelic. He's going to get her an opportunity to get back in the business and make it up again. And she ends up kind of sending him a note. He comes up. She sort of seduces him, lets him know she's going to give him, some singing lessons, give him some money so he can get a suit, so they can get back in the business. And then when you see who it really is, when he goes home to his wife and his kid, and he's an alcoholic. He used the money to buy whiskey. His wife is holding the baby. He's, throws the baby, punches his wife as she's holding her, and he's just an absolute, monster, essentially. Oh, yeah. The voice of an angel, but, he's completely broken man. Gave up his job as an accountant so he could go around singing for pennies instead of taking care of his family. And then the kicker, of course, is he couldn't remember where this woman's apartment was, even if he wanted to have the job, because he's a complete and utter moron.
Yeah. No, and it ends with him, singing in alleys, presumably trying to find her again if he
Yes.
Sings in the right alley. But yeah, and this is brutal. This whole bit before this, where he is, very violent towards his wife on multiple panels of this. So
and the baby, when I say baby, I'm talking, this is like a 6-month-old baby that he's tossing around and punching the woman and while she's holding the baby and stuff. It looks like baby, does she break a bottle over his head? And he says, "Oh, you broke my whiskey." That's all he cared about.
Yep, and he's got his tongue out trying to get all the whiskey droppings off the glass.
Yeah. Just a deplorable drunk.
Yeah. And then, and I mean, even the woman that brings him up, she's clearly not the moral fabric of the story. No, she is. There's this like kind of story. She's like talking about how much like she hated her husband, and it's like, he finally died last year and stuff like that. It's like
she's seducing him and kind of sleeping with him to save to ensure that he's going to come back, kind of thing. It was just a weird thing, and she's begging this like music producer or like a club owner to let this guy sing, and you can tell that she has made some mistakes along the way, and this person does not want to deal with her anymore.
Yeah. No, for sure. She's using him. He's using her.
Absolutely. Very cynical. The voice of an angel, but the heart of a drunkard.
Yeah. No, it is. Yeah, this is exactly. Cynical is the best word to describe that story.
The third one, I would say, is I don't know. I'm surprised it got out. That one's pretty dramatic. That's some crazy stuff there. Essentially, the man is he's a superintendent, I believe. He's working on the Dropsy building, and everyone's kind of scared of him. But you kind of see that he's really hardworking. But then when he goes into his room, he's kind of a pervert. His entire walls are lined up with pictures of naked women.
Yeah.
And then I guess this young lady, I believe at the end they confirm that she's 10 years old. She comes in there, and I don't even know if I can describe the scene here on YouTube without getting in trouble.
Yes,
but it's essentially pedophilia.
Yeah, no, like these stories, like after A Contract with God, the rest of the stories in here, this is like, these are underground comics. Now we're getting into that territory with these.
Yeah, and there's even a bit of that. Well, not a bit of it. There's even some pedophilia in the fourth story as well, where an older, mature woman seduces and I guess deflowers a 15-year-old.
Yeah.
So like I said, very cynical by nature, beautifully illustrated. Specifically, I'll talk about A Contract with God. I would definitely recommend the book. It's just the craftsmanship. It's second to none. You don't see stuff like this anymore, and it's unfortunate. It's kind of the way everything is now, Joe Corallo. When you look at the things that we make in America, there's not many things that modern versions of what we were making in this era where you could say, well, the craftsmanship's better because we're all relying on automated facilities and computer animation stuff to design all these things in factories, whereas these things were all handcrafted. They just is a different era, I guess, as far as American ingenuity.
Yeah, no, it is a shame because this stuff really stands out to me. I think it's important. I think it's the kind of thing that more people should dive into because it kind of sparks in you again that your love of comics and why this medium stands out. And there's a bunch of ways to buy it. I have the hardcover trilogy. I think
that's with the other graphic novels.
Yeah, this also has a Life Force and Dropsy Avenue in it. So it has all of it. I think it's out of print, but it's not hard to find. You
can go to Barnes and Noble and get A Contract with God and Other Tenements.
Yeah.
Of I can't remember the whole thing.
Yeah.
No, that's the one that most people have. But hey, if you enjoy the graphic novel section at your Barnes and Noble or wherever you get them, you have Will Eisner to thank for it. He essentially invented the genre. He perfected it, And they're there to this day. You cannot deny the legacy. There's a reason the Eisners are named after him, and just wonderful stuff. I really appreciated this with Joe.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you did. I thought you would. I hope other people get a kick out of it. And yeah, you haven't checked out Will Eisner's work. A Contract with God's a good place to start.
Absolutely, and definitely want to go back and check out The Spirit. Now that I've seen this, to see what that's all about. Because it's a different. He's using his graphic novels like a different type of storytelling than probably sequential comic book storytelling. It's a different kind of art. So definitely appreciate this. We will have Eric Breen back next week, right?
Yeah, no, and
we're talking Hulk, getting back on Marvel.
Yeah, well, we'll get back to Marvel. It'll be good.
Absolutely. And do you have anything else to say about this video and the subject of Will Eisner and A Contract with God?
Yeah, I mean, his contributions are endless. There's countless people out here making comics who learn directly from him. Definitely check out Jules Pfeiffer's work as well. He's a living legend. We don't have a lot of living legends left at this point in comics going back far enough. So check out Jules Pfeiffer as well.